Hey, everybody, how you doing? It's Mark Ross, ITK Radio. With us today, Matt Mackowiak, coming to us from, I'm guessing Texas, the heart of Texas. Don't mess with Texas. Matt, how you doing? Are you in Texas?
Good, doing great. Yeah, down in Austin. How are you?
Love it, man. City of the future. I was in Austin. I hadn't been there for like a decade, and I was there probably like 6 months ago. Oh my gosh, it's like a real city.
A lot going on. It's funny you use the phrase "city of the future." I've been using that phrase for a while now, and I think that's a big part of why you've seen the in-migration, not just of people, but also of capital. There's a feeling that Austin can be really a global city of the future that can learn the lessons from other cities, and hopefully we can do that. We don't want to continue the mistakes that we've seen in other places.
I think cities, I love college towns, right? And I think they're just an economic engine. There's so much going on. Obviously, University of Texas there. You also got the state capital, so you have all those kind of resources. And yeah, and just the quality of life, easy to get around, easy to get to either side of the coast, favorable tax rates, et cetera, et cetera. A lot going on in Austin. Finally, you get professional soccer, which is great.
Yeah, we've been season ticket holders from the beginning. It is exciting to have Major League Soccer. We have global events in Austin with South by Southwest, with Austin City Limits Festival. We had, up until a couple of years ago, we had the only F1 track in the United States. I guess they now have this makeshift one in Miami, and I guess they're going to be doing something in Vegas on the Strip this year, which should be pretty cool. Whether we can break into the four big major league sports, I think remains a question. The Spurs probably make the NBA not possible. And so, the question is, would one of the other three sports be a possibility? But look, Austin's booming. It's the 11th largest city in the country. It's growing very, very fast. And it's an exciting time to be here.
I was there. I was grabbing coffee somewhere on Congress Street, and I was sitting by some older gentlemen. They were realtor developers. And it was funny you mentioned about construction, and they were pointing at the different buildings, with a gleam in their eyes saying, who's going in there, what's happening, the cranes, and a lot of excitement, a lot of development. How is, I'm sure there's folks, though, that aren't too pleased with the development, wrestling with that, the NIMBYism, et cetera. But is Austin, you're talking about how it's not making mistakes. Is there more consciousness, or are there just more people coming together saying, listen, we want to do something great here, but let's not ruin and make it ginormous?
Yeah, and I don't want to say we haven't made mistakes. We have. My point was I was going to hope that we could learn from San Francisco, LA, Seattle, Portland, Chicago, DC, New York. But we have, I think, overcome some of those mistakes, mostly because Austin is, I think, both relatively affordable compared to the places that most people are coming from, and because Austin didn't make a lot of those bad decisions till quite a bit later than San Francisco and LA. So those cities are further ahead in terms of the ramifications. We defunded our police. We have a pretty significant police staffing crisis. We allowed open camping, which I helped overturn, but that did some damage for a year and a half. The boom downtown is pretty epic. You don't have to wait 10 years, Mark. You could come back 6 months from now, and it would look different than it did when you were last here. Largest JW Marriott in the United States is here. We're getting lots of boutique hotels. The largest building in Texas is being built right now. I think we're going to have the two largest buildings in Texas when they're done here in a couple of years. So certainly a lot happening. But like all big cities, we have big challenges. Affordability is becoming a significant problem. We have limited transportation infrastructure. We have some public safety challenges right now. But it is, again, as I said before, a very exciting time to be here. There's a lot going on.
I think what's interesting about your background, Matt, is that I see you as somebody as a communication operative. You're at the intersection of politics, but also comms, strategy, all that good stuff. But you also operate, in my mind, nationally, right? But you're also very focused on what's happening in your local community. Can you just talk about that experience and how that helps you? One of my favorite phrases is high-low, right? It's really good to talk to the Wall Street Journal, but it's super important to talk to the Columbus Dispatch. And if you're going to do a fancy event at a think tank in DC, you should also do something back in Lansing, Michigan, right? So could you talk about how that's really helped you, or maybe in your mind, has it helped your communications? Has it helped your strategy operating these two distinct environments?
Appreciate the question. Yeah. So, I started my firm in 2009, having spent, 12, 13 years in DC, Bush administration at Homeland Security doing communications, Bush White House doing advance, Bush reelect in Iowa, and then in the U.S. Senate as a press secretary for two senators. I had a great run. As you know, Mark, when you're young in DC, you get these incredible opportunities to do things you probably shouldn't be doing at your age. But you do grow up quickly and you learn a lot. But when I came back to Texas, I didn't want to be bored and I didn't want to be siloed. And I did have some concern when I came back, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago, 2011, late 2011, that the pace of Austin was going to be too slow for me because the pace of DC, is nonstop. I remember one of the early weeks I was in DC in 2003, a son of a U.S. Senator from Florida, said in his own very distinctive drawl that the weeknights in DC are more fun than the weekends. And I think that was true then. It's probably even more true now. But I remember when I started my firm, I really wanted to be professionally engaged, and I would even say relevant at all three levels: nationally, whether you want to call it regionally or statewide, and then locally. The national and state stuff, was actually pretty easy early on. The local stuff, because Austin's a pretty democratic and progressive city, I didn't see a obvious way for a Republican operative to make a real difference. In the last 3 or 4 years, we've done that with Save Austin Now with my local group that's nonpartisan. But to your question, I personally like, being involved and engaged at different levels. I think it makes every day different. It has a lot of variety, a lot of unpredictability. I don't have the same, day after day after day. And I like that. There is the whole concept of like, a jack of all trades, master of none. And I do think one of the ways to build wealth is to become, narrow and deep in a particular field. I know for a while you were doing that related to U.S. and China. Whatever the thing is, it could be anything. I mean, it's amazing. You can learn about people who become very, very, very wealthy, producing some very niche product, and it's because they dominate, that product. And while I don't necessarily offer a product, I've decided to kind of maintain, I think, my relationships, my knowledge base, my experience at all three levels. And I try to work on all three levels every single day. And that could be reading articles. It could be posting on social media. It could be talking to reporters. It could be working on client projects. It could be doing pro bono work. Could be any number of things. And I enjoy it that way. It doesn't work for everyone, but it's worked for me so far.
It's interesting you mentioned the specialization. We could talk about that forever. I always, joke I'd rather be Porsche than General Motors, and niche is rich, all that good stuff.
Yep.
But I don't think, even in my own experience, just thinking about like comms or just strategy, just the amount of content that is required, or just like what I call intelligence. Can you talk about, for me, it's like you got to know what the hell is happening in the world, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, and you got to consume a lot of data, a lot of articles, talk to different folks. Can you just talk about comms is really an intelligence gathering, figuring it out, and then talking? I mean, I think there's a perception that a press secretary is just talking all the time, but a lot of it is information gathering.
Yeah, that's a great point. Having been a press secretary up on the Hill, you're reading all the time. And part of the reason for that is that I think your office, your boss, your chief of staff, want you to be current. And that doesn't mean current that day. It means current, that hour or that, that quarter hour. Information is traveling so fast. We used to talk about the 24-hour news cycle. I mean, it's now minute to minute, changing all the time. But one of the things we've seen in media is, it used to be at the national level, you had these broad kind of old school media institutions that had large audiences. We're seeing, the U.S. is moving more towards a British model, where not only are I think media organizations going to be more kind of openly partisan, but they're also going to be focusing on more narrow audiences. And certainly social media and the internet have accelerated that. Whereas now, if you can have a Substack with 10 or 20,000 subscribers, you can make a pretty good living. And you look at, I know we're going to talk about DeSantis, look at his launch on Twitter Spaces, having 300,000 or 400,000 people by the time it ended. May not be a huge number, but that's not the total number that viewed it. I think it's up to 10 or 15 million now. Fox News, even in the height of Tucker, was getting 2.5 or 3 million viewers, on an evening. So, but yeah, communicators, I think it's important to be somewhat educated about policy. You're never going to be the expert. You're never going to probably have a law degree. You're not going to be writing legislation, but you need to know enough to be dangerous. And policy people don't get communications, and generally communications people don't get policy, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't try. And so, one of the things I did when I was a press secretary, and that I've done since running a boutique PR firm now for 10 years, is I read all the time. And because of that, I don't read a lot of books. It's because I'm reading all day, every day, much like I'm sure you are. And it's about all kinds of things, global news, national news, business news. I watch CNBC now at this point almost exclusively. I think the rest of it is professional wrestling, and it's basically useless. And that's because I think CNBC reports actual news that actually affects people. Housing starts and inflation and tech and you name it. These are the things that are really affecting people. Whether it could be people that have retirement accounts to hedge funds and everything in between. So communications at its core, Mark, is about taking complex subjects, making them simple, and that is a skill you can gain. It is a skill you can improve and sharpen with time and with experience. I've done a lot of public speaking and a lot of media interviews over my life, and a lot of writing, probably written 500 op-eds under my own name. I don't even know how many cable hits I've done over the years or how many public speaking opportunities I've had over the years. Some of that is natural, the ability to communicate, to not be afraid, to say exactly what you want to say, to not make mistakes or create controversy. And no one bats 1,000, right? But I think over time, the more practice you get, the better you get at it. And I've had an enormous amount of practice, particularly these last 10 years as I've been out on my own doing this PR thing.
Yeah, getting in the reps, man. There's nothing else like it. One of my favorite sayings is you got to go to Hamburg, right? Like so the Beatles, when they made their big launch, they went to Hamburg, just played tons of music before they went in. And I think I'm curious, in some ways you're a practitioner, you have your own advocacy group around, the Save Austin Now. You've just said you've written, hundreds of opinion editorials, you're speaking, but also you're giving advice. So talk about the ability as a communicator. I mean, if you wrestle with that, listen, do you tell clients or listen, I'm out there, I'm doing this, I'm trying stuff, I'm experimenting, I'm a practitioner as well as a strategist. Can you talk about those two sides of your communication profession?
Yeah, another great question. And I have to think if there's a circumstance where, my own views and my own sort of, analysis side is in some way, conflicted with a client. It certainly is conflicted in the sense of there's been client opportunities I haven't taken because those things haven't either aligned with how I look at the world or they don't align with past clients or even current clients. That happens from time to time. Those kind of conflicts arise. But Mark, I remember when I got started doing this in the 2011 timeframe. When you just get started, if you don't have an anchor client, if you don't really know what you're doing, you can kind of tread water for a while. And I did that. I actually started in 2009. I managed a congressional campaign in 2010. I moved back to Texas in 2011. But in 2009, that second half of that year, I didn't have a lot of success. I was trying to figure out, what is it I'm offering? What do I charge? What do contracts look like? Basic things that
no, 100%, man, 100%.
You think you would know inherently, and you improve over time. But the ability to go out and I do a good amount of analytical work, both locally, regionally, and nationally. And that's talking to reporters. It's doing radio interviews, podcast, TV, et cetera. I enjoy that stuff. I do think there's value in terms of raising your profile, making sure people are aware that you're out there and what you're doing. It used to be a lot more important to me than it is now. Over time, I've become kind of more and more focused on Texas, just because there's so much to do here. Just between the four major markets, you've got four of the 11 or 12 largest cities in the country. 3 hours in any direction. You can get a lot done here. Huge numbers of Fortune 100 companies in Texas. Huge growth. Not just oil and gas, not just tech. It's biomedical and finance and you name it. So I think probably when I started, I didn't understand as well as I do now that you can be smart and provide insight and even provide a good quote without being controversial. You can do it in a smart way and be careful in the words that you use. And that comes with experience and with time. I think early on, particularly, as early as when Twitter was getting started way back then, I was probably needlessly combative, sort of punching up at times. I think some of that social media stuff was probably not particularly helpful. Probably mostly just in sort of developing the reputation that you want, the perception that you want other people to have about you. So you learn these things as you grow and you mature, and I've certainly learned them myself.
Can you talk about? It was interesting. The business news. Like my go-to is Bloomberg, right? Bloomberg TV, same kind of space, but even CNBC and
Bloomberg's
Bloomberg
great.
have different kind of vibes. But can you just talk about how there's so much information, right? Like Substacks, do you follow somebody on Twitter? Do you follow somebody on, podcasting? You as a strategist, when you're talking to clients saying, listen, like we need to pay attention to this person, even though they may not have a huge reach, they're important because of X. Or listen, this reporter at the Financial Times is super important. We need to pay attention to them. Obviously that comes from experience, but can you just talk about how, when you talk to clients, like separating the noise from what really matters?
Yeah, separate the signal from the noise is important. I mean, in a sense, it's a big part of what they're hiring you for, right? Anyone that has a media directory can make enough calls and send enough emails and probably get you a little bit of coverage on almost anything. Part of what we get hired for is to, and of course, it's a question about whether you're doing proactive media or reactive media. But if you're doing proactive media, the client is not just valuing your relationships, but they're valuing your judgment too. And so you do want to go where you can get the most out of it. And it could be, a reporter that gets a particular issue really well, or understands nuance or understands substance really well, or has a particular track record. Could be a particular media organization because their reach, is exactly what you need, geographically or demographically or on an issue. But you're right. I mean, there's been a proliferation. There's been a proliferation of media sources and even media categories now. So much that's out there. As I said before, what you have is, instead of having 4 or 5 or 10 sources that have large national audiences, now you have 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 that all have very narrow but deep audiences. And podcasting, I think, has changed the game. And as you know, it's very hard to build podcast audiences. There's way too many of them. The economic
discovery the discovery is rubbish,
there.
man. It's super hard to discover, right? I mean, anyways,
It is. And I did a podcast with Washington Times for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, did 300 episodes, enjoyed it tremendously. Had I been able to make that, in some way a career or something, I would have enjoyed it very, very, very much, because I loved having smart conversations with smart people. But, when I learned that you needed to reach roughly, and I don't know what the number is now, but back then it was 40,000 downloads per episode to be in a position to go after the major advertisers, the Caspers, the Blue Aprons of the world. And 40,000 may not sound like very many, but unless you are a top 100 or top 200 podcast, you're not getting 40,000 episode downloads. You'd be lucky if you're getting 1,000 or 2,000. And I mean, I had U.S. senators and major authors and other people, diplomats. So, but again, on projects, look, it's a little hard to answer the question specifically because it depends so much on the circumstance and the client. I always start with, what are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to change your perception? Are you trying to engage on an issue, positively or negatively? Are you responding in a crisis situation? What does success look like? I think it's always important that the client and the vendor have a pretty clear sense of what success looks like. If they want a home run and you think a stand-up double is success, there's some distance there. And managing that client's expectations is a big part of how you have success in this industry.
How do you, well, 2 things, like you've dealt with some really, high profile people, both professionally, but also, obviously on Capitol Hill. Can you just talk about advice, dealing with principals, giving them advice? I always think about people, obviously, that, they want to run for Senate or high office. They obviously have a very strong opinion. They, very confidence. They're not lacking confidence, but can you just talk about your experience with how you direct a client to encourage them to maybe try stuff, or the coaching aspect of a communication strategy background?
Yeah, it's a push-pull, right? It's a balance, because if you have your idea and your idea is not one that they agree with, I mean, you can push to some extent, but at some point they're going to stop listening. They're going to look other places. On the other hand, if all you do is everything they say, you're not really providing a lot of value there either, unless they're a very sophisticated client that knows exactly what they want, exactly what they're doing, and they're exactly right. In the end, it's a little bit like the offensive coordinator and the quarterback. You can call the play, someone else is running the play. We kind of help call the plays, but in the end, if they want to do an option to the left and we want to do a Hail Mary, we're probably going to do the option to the left. But yeah, and look, principal service is one of the things that I think it's one of the most valuable things about DC, is that you get to interact with principals pretty early on. And because it is sort of a city made up of student body presidents from their high school, everyone's type A, everyone thinks they're special, everybody thinks they're brilliant, everyone thinks they're going to run for Congress and be president or whatever. The city does chew up young people, and some of them succeed and some of them fail, and some of them realize it's not for them. But in the end, you have a small number of people that make significant decisions in DC. I don't even think it's not even 535. I think all 100 senators matter. I think there's probably 50 or 75 members of Congress who truly matter. And then even in an administration, you're talking about really a fairly small number, maybe 25 or 30 people probably, that are really making significant decisions. So if you have the ability to be in front of, one of those people, earning their confidence, earning their trust, it's the kind of things you would look for in almost any employee, right? Show up on time, maybe even show up early, be there before your boss gets there, stay there till afterwards, be reliable. These same kind of things you would look for in hiring an employee, I think are true when you're serving a principal. But in the end of the day, there's no substitute for establishing the relationship. And that relationship gets built over time. One of the things you find in DC when you get hired for jobs is, you get thrown in right away. You're thrown into the deep end. You can either swim or you can't. I remember when I worked for Senator Conrad Burns in Montana, I think my 5th day was December 20th, 2005. We were on the front page of Washington Times about the Jack Amoff lobbying scandal. I wasn't there when all the things happened, but we were dealing with the fallout. Having been to Montana and having really gotten up to speed quickly, but not really being fully well versed on all the details, you get thrown in quickly. And as a communicator, I think that's one of the things that makes a good communicator is can you parachute into a situation and be useful and valuable and educated quickly. I almost pride myself on the fact that we do work in all kinds of areas. We focused, I think, on energy, healthcare, tech, maybe telecom, those four areas. But we've done all kinds of just absolutely random projects over the last 10 years. And it's not because I'm ever going to be as knowledgeable about, some narrow issue as someone who's spent their career doing it. But again, it's about taking those complex subjects and converting them into simple, easy to understand, almost bite-sized concepts. And the best communicators can do that. They can do it quickly with confidence. There's a thin line between confidence and arrogance. And I think the older you get, the more you understand that, either in yourself or as you see it in others. But confidence is always backed up by knowledge. And if you're not, as we to our point earlier, if you're not constantly seeking knowledge, then that confidence is going to be pretty shallow.
Yeah, as we wrap up here, I want to talk about tactics. I definitely want to talk about, the DeSantis Twitter Spaces. I'm a big tactics come and go. Like for me, strategy is super important. But are there tactics or stuff you find interesting, or you're like, I want to spend some more time around this, or I think there's an opportunity here to get our message out, without revealing any, trade secrets? But are you seeing some interesting stuff, or what's gotten your attention lately?
Well, I think a couple of things come to mind. One of the things our firm does that's a little unique compared to most firms that are in this space is we produce opposition research, and we do it in-house.
Oh, interesting.
A lot of PR firms sort of farm that out. We do it in-house, and we do both political and corporate. And so the ability to marry those products with our both strategy and tactics side, I think, gives us something different that we offer. And just so people understand, opposition research is not digging in trash. It's almost exclusively public records searches, right? The amount of information that is lawfully available, if you know where to ask and what to look for, and how to do it the right way, is immense. We're regularly producing 150, 200 page hyperlinked, verified opposition books on targets all the time. And so I think that's one thing. I don't know how much your quote unquote traditional PR firm is doing that, but that's one thing that's been useful for us. I think second is, this is an area where I probably need to learn more, but understanding digital media, not just how to post something or how something might go viral or something like that, but truly understanding targeting, the differences between the platforms, the audiences that focus on specific platforms. I don't use TikTok, and I don't use Snapchat, but young people use those things really almost to the exclusion of everything else, right? And so we have people on our team that understand those platforms really well. But I think if you're going to run a PR firm, look, the media, the ad buying specialty is moving away from traditional media into digital media rapidly. We're not, I think, at the point now where campaigns are spending more on digital than they are on traditional, but it's getting closer and closer and closer every cycle. In the next 4, 5, 6 cycles, we'll be there. And of course, that's happening, with television as well, right? I mean, sort of linear television is moving to streaming. It's basically moving to very highly targeted media platforms as well. So, again, not a brilliant insight, but I do think the more you understand how to target, how to run sophisticated ads. When we were doing our Prop E campaign to overturn the camping ordinance in Austin, I mean, we were running 100 or 200 Facebook ads to targeted audiences at any one time, doing A/B testing, doubling down on the ads that do well and pausing or lightening up on the ads that do poorly. In the end, we were advertising to a much larger audience than we would have been had we been buying time on the 6 o'clock news on a local newscast or buying a print ad in a local newspaper. And you're doing it at a much more efficient, level. So again, I don't know that that's a keen insight, but I think for anyone that's in the communication space, you need to have a sophisticated understanding of digital media.
No, Matt, I think that's a good point. Like, I just think about, I mean, there are people, say LinkedIn, like their whole job is to teach you how to use that platform better. That's a good point. Just like quarterly, reach out to these people, say, hey, man, just can I get a briefing on what the hell's going on with this platform? You don't have to be an expert in it, but just having a better sense of what's happening with Snap and TikTok and LinkedIn and YouTube. And there are people there that want to teach you how to use their stuff better. So, listen, I'm curious about your thoughts around the Twitter Spaces. I think it was a bridge too far. It just seemed too aggressive, too out of the box for a presidential campaign. The numbers are interesting. I don't know. And then the fact that, both you and I have done tons of events, and the horror when things don't go right after you plan an event is super interesting. I don't know. What are your thoughts? I mean, it's something we're going to be talking about, but does it really matter, or does it matter?
Yeah, I don't think it'll matter. I think a week or 10 days from now, we'll forget it even happened, that there was, a glitch for a little while. It was frustrating, obviously, and I'm sure that while DeSantis was frustrated, I'm sure the Twitter folks were even more frustrated. Elon doesn't suffer fools. In fact, I think I saw their head of engineering at Twitter was either fired or resigned. Look, one of the things you learn having been an advanced guy is that you always want to control as many variables as you can, particularly on things that you can control. You can't control debates, you can't control news, you can't. There's a lot of things you can't control, but you can control your launch, when you launch, where you launch, what your message is, who's there, right? All these factors. Now, I think had DeSantis's campaign in some way fouled up the Twitter space, that would have been different. In this case, it was kind of Twitter's fault, or the internet. Too much interest. I guess it had to do with connecting Musk's account to the space. Once they switched to the other moderator, it made it work. But so there was that, and it kind of gave rise to a very simple, almost shallow, insult to the campaign launch for both Trump's campaign, his competitors, Democrats, media opponents. That said, it was outside the box. There's one thing about it I really didn't like, and that is it was audio only.
Yeah.
And, pictures and video of your launch are important. They become part of your paid media. If you look on cable news, there was really nothing cable news could do to pick up on DeSantis' announcement. Now, they could play a clip from his appearance on Fox News with Trey Gowdy or other networks, but that was later, and that's not the same thing. That picture of you saying, I am running for president of the United States, is one of the seminal moments of any candidate. That said, I do think it was unique, right? It was long form. It was over an hour. Obviously, being able to sort of bask in the glow of Elon and everything that comes along with that. There's good and bad that comes with that. I think it's probably more good than bad, particularly in a Republican primary. While I think his sort of canned, 2-minute summary of why he's running was a little bit weird and dry, I thought the rest of it was very fluid and engaged and interesting and had a lot of depth to it. So look, in the end, will it matter? That matters a lot more that you raised $8 million in the first 24 hours than that the Twitter Spaces didn't work for 20 or 25 minutes. The question to me is this a tactic that's going to be used? Probably not by the other candidates this cycle, but is this how it's going to be in the future? Does Twitter Spaces become video as well? If Tucker ends up getting out of his Fox contract and starts doing a nightly show on Twitter, how does that work? How do they do commercials? How does there are a lot of questions, and it's fascinating. And Twitter is, without question, moving into a space where they're going to start competing with cable networks. They've already kind of started that. Tucker may accelerate that to some extent, but it was an interesting launch. Yeah,
with Twitter's new CEO, I think it's definitely a platform to watch. They're doing some interesting stuff, and I don't know if you caught the story, Matt. There were rumblings that Ford and some of the other auto companies weren't going to have AM radio in 2024, 2025 models. And, the big thing for me is like, especially politicians and strategists like you and me, like we're like, listen, man, we need as many different platforms as possible to tell our story. And at least Ford has walked back and said, hey, we're going to add AM radio. And I mean, part of the TikTok debate is really like who's controlling the media. Like if these are the new platforms, if NBC, ABC, CBS are going away, which I'm dating myself, who's going to control this stuff? So I think that's like the interesting thought experiment. But yeah, I think which makes our jobs fun because the field is always shifting. So our platforms are shifting.
It is. I did see the story about AM radio. That was concerning, and certainly for conservatives and Republicans, AM talk radio has been a huge beneficial platform.
I mean, for me, man, like I grew up on. I love AM radio. Yeah, driving around the Great Lakes, and of course, listen to AM radio.
Yeah, you're on a drive throughout the country. You're driving somewhere through the middle of the night. You're in a rural area. You're up early in the morning. AM radio never stops generally. One of the things that's been interesting to me in media, Mark, is how I kind of thought podcasts were going to basically replace radio, or certainly talk radio, and maybe to some extent they have. It depends on what kind of car you have. I have a Tesla. I'm fortunate, so I can move between, traditional radio, podcasts, platforms like Spotify. But for most people, they don't really have that functionality yet. We may be there in a few years, but when it becomes as easy to pull up, the Joe Rogan podcast or your podcast as it is to pull up your local, FM station, listen to music, or listen to AM station. Of course, without Rush, I mean, I think AM radio is changing, and no one has really taken over and kept AM radio where Rush did. His dominance in that medium and his really creation of the economic model of that medium, I think, even to this day, is not understood to the extent it should be. Mark Levin has a large audience. Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham. There's 5 or 7 people that are probably broadcasting to several million people a day across a lot of different markets, but. Rush created that advertising market because that noon to 2 p.m. central window, or noon to 3, whatever it was so predictable, so dominant that if you had Rush in your market, it didn't matter what market you were, you dominated that market, and it created the ability for you to run the station and to fund everything else, and the advertising could fund it. So I've been surprised how podcasts haven't fully supplanted radio. That may be happening to some extent, but it's not happening as much as I thought it would by now.
Now it is interesting, like certain events, like a presidential launch requires, you're right, photography, video, like it needs all the senses, but there is something powerful just about audio. Humans are wired for it. We're storytellers naturally. And I agree. I don't know if it's discovery or what's happening, but there's certainly a lot of interest around it. There's a pod. I don't know if you know this pod, Acquired. It talks to different business people. I haven't listened to it yet. I can send you the link, but they interviewed the CEO from Spotify, Daniel Ek, and Spotify apparently is making a huge push in the podcast, mainly because the profit margins are so big and, they want to do other stuff. So I don't know, maybe we're still a decade away from podcasting becoming the new radio. Who knows?
And the ad model on podcasting, continues to have problems, right?
Yeah.
Because, as I said before, and if you're on Spotify and you're a creator that has huge platforms and huge audiences, like our Joe Rogan, you're doing great. If you're not on a platform, a subscriber-based platform, then you're out there just singing for your supper, trying to make it work. One of the advantages of podcasting, it's actually also a disadvantage, is that it's very inexpensive. Right. I mean, the equipment itself, even if you wanted to get sort of top line equipment, you're talking about $1,000 maybe, and you don't even really need that, right? Really. And so that barrier to entry is very low. And now it's like, if you don't have a podcast, why not? Why don't you? Are you not a serious person? You don't have your own podcast? And that's been great in a way. And so, like, if I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, I mean, there's 10 or 20 very, very, very professional, very detailed podcasts related to Pittsburgh Steelers. It's too much. I can't listen to all of them. I only have a couple that I listen to, and I get behind. But you're right, though, because it's audio only. What it does is it forces you to focus on the words and on the storytelling. And your mind can race, and you can work, or you can, do other things, text or something. But generally, if you're taking time to listen to a podcast, you really do want to hear what it is they're saying. And so I love that it's long form. I love that it's open-ended. I love that no one controls it. There's a lot to love about it. And there's so much variety out there. Really, almost any topic you're interested in. You can pick a random topic, say badminton. You're a huge badminton fan. You always want to know more about it. Go search in the iTunes store, or the podcast store on your phone. There's probably significant podcast opportunities podcast options out there related to badminton. It's crazy.
No, I had a chat this week with a professor at UNC, Keenan Flagler, and he said he spends 2 hours a day just pods, like listening on topics, and like that's his new, like, if he's like, yeah, I want to learn more about badminton or quantum physics, like, goes to the pod. I don't know, pretty wild stuff.
Well, that's one of the great things is, and because reading can get boring, right? And sometimes you don't know necessarily whether what you're reading is really what you need to be reading. But once you have a trusted voice on a particular topic, someone that has a lot of credibility, a lot of experience, you can really learn a lot quickly through podcasting. And so, if you're interested in AI right now, right? I mean, there would be thousands of podcast episodes created probably in the last 6 months alone, right, that are focused on AI. You could get pretty smart on AI really in probably a day or two of spending 4 or 6 hours listening to podcasts, time which you could be exercising or going for a walk or driving in your car or on the train or doing almost anything. So again, it's a fascinating new medium. I wonder if it has to contract a little bit for the economic model to come into full shape. The fact that you have a podcast that only gets 1,000 or 2,000 listeners, maybe downloads, that's still a significant audience, and that still has value to somebody. And so until that model can be built out fully for those kind of podcasts, I understand the Joe Rogan type of thing where it's paint by numbers, right? Where you're using a promo code, you're trying to get people to buy mattresses or buy Blue Apron or whatever else. But for someone that's at that, maybe they're in the they're not in the bottom 2%, but they're maybe in the bottom 20%, right? They still have a really loyal audience that cares a lot, and that will probably take a red advertisement from a host seriously.
Yeah, and the idea of micropayments and these other kind of Patreon systems, I don't know. It's exciting time, and there's creativity. And like I said, the guys at Spotify, it's interesting that they're putting money behind it. It's interesting, when the big companies or big folks are putting money behind it, they obviously see something. So it's something to follow. Hey, as we wrap up, anything you're reading or watching that you want to share that's fun? Could be frivolous, could be high-low. We're entering the summer beach season. I guess it's the beach season full time in Austin, right? It never ends, but summer has come to the north. So anything you're reading or watching?
That's a great question. I guess I'll point out maybe two Substacks, and I'll mention one thing I do as well for anyone that's interested in Texas. But I think Substack, we haven't talked as much about Substack. I mean, it's another really interesting model. You mentioned Patreon. The idea that people can become content creators themselves and can make a living doing it. That has been a wholesale change in the way that media works. And I think it's very encouraging. I'll mention John Ellis's really great kind of global kind of news summary. I think it's called News Items Substack. Very widely read globally. He really synthesizes really a global picture every morning, every weekday morning, in a very succinct, thoughtful way. My friend Michael Schellenberger has a fascinating Substack as well. It's a little hard to summarize the topic, but he is a kind of former left-wing environmental activist in California who has really been sobered by what's happened to San Francisco as he's lived there for quite a while. So he reports on what's happening in cities with homelessness and addiction and those kinds of issues. We've gotten to know him and have done some work with him, and I think quite a lot of him. He also was one of the journalists who was involved in the Twitter files reporting, which I know you either loved or hated, depending on your ideological viewpoint. Finally, I'll just mention one thing that we do. I do a Substack as well called Must Read Texas. And the concept was to take all the news from around the state of Texas, synthesize it, put it in one clean, easy to read email each weekday morning. We have 18,000 subscribers. Get tremendously positive feedback. mustreadtexas.substack.com if you're interested in Texas. And that's not just politics; it's business, it's culture, it's sports. We focus a lot on sort of politics and government, but we sprinkle in some other things in there too. Get great feedback, and I've enjoyed doing that. We've been doing that now for about 3 years.
I love it. Must read Texas. Don't mess with Texas. Yeah, Texas, man. What a country. What a state of mind. I love it.
It's a fascinating place, right? Like you have, Dallas is sort of the financial capital, Houston's the energy capital, San Antonio is, military city USA, Austin's a sort of tech hub, all very different. They have some similar qualities, and when you're in Texas, you sort of feel like you're in Texas. But those cities are very urban, and in all four cities, San Antonio maybe less so, but they've had huge renaissance in their downtown areas, where you can not just work downtown but live downtown and enjoy downtown. With mass transit, with shopping, with restaurants, with live music venues, with mixed-use development. So, yeah, it's an exciting time in Texas. I mean, Texas and Florida are the future. Mark, I had sort of one insight when I started my firm, and it was the future of the country is Texas and Florida. And so, I really wanted to be someone maybe that was sort of a, thought leader or practitioner, successful practitioner in both states. It took me about 10 years to really get to where I wanted to be in Texas. And we've started building in Florida, particularly in South Florida, and we've had some success there. I haven't taken it all the way of where I want to, but they're both really exciting places, huge amounts of investment, huge amounts of migration, major companies. COVID certainly accelerated a lot of that because Texas and Florida opened quicker, more quickly than a lot of other places. But they're both fascinating states with a lot going on. They're complicated. They have lots of problems, lots of potential. And when you have explosive growth, it creates challenges.
Now, I mean, Texas is an economic juggernaut. I think it's got the most of any state. It's got the most, I mean, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 other states, but I mean, between the different industries, it's not a single industry state. It's got these 4 metropolitan areas, rich history. It's got a certain vibe. Like you say, I know when I'm in Texas, man, like it's definitely, it's cool. So,
Yep.
No, I think you made a good bet, and it'll keep going. I love it. It's good stuff.
Yep.
Well, Matt, thanks for making the time, man. This was fun.
Thanks, Mark. I enjoyed it. Take care.
See you soon. Ciao.